This video is an illustration of how to complete the first part of LaGuardia Community College's Topics in Astronomy lab entitled The Greenhouse Effect. In this video, we'll be going over Part 1, Greenhouse Gases. There will be subsequent videos for Parts 2 and 3, which cover the greenhouse effect and climate change. This video can be useful if you're just having a hard time getting comfortable with the interface and you want to see me demonstrate how everything works, or potentially if you can't download the greenhouse effect simulator from the University of Colorado website or can't get it to work. Because in this video and its companions, I'll be going over everything you need to see in order to successfully answer the questions on today's lab. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. On the right-hand side of the screen here, you can see the questions for this part of today's lab. And we'll begin with question number 1. What happens to photons of visible light when they hit a molecule of CH4, which is methane? I'll come over here to my simulator, which I've already got started and set up, and I've configured it so that we have methane gas in the middle, and I've set it up to shine a visible light source, as opposed to an infrared light source, on our molecule. So let's go ahead and switch that flashlight on. This slider allows light to come out more or less quickly. For this demonstration, I'm going to let it come out pretty fast, but when we move on to the infrared light, I'll let the light come out a little bit more slowly to illustrate a bit better what's really going on. This is methane. What you should be looking for is to see what, if anything, happens to that methane molecule as these visible light photons stream past it. And the observed effect, or none if you don't see one, is going to be your answer to question number 1 for the lab. That's question 1. If you need to see that again, of course you should feel free to back up the video, but I'm going to move on now to looking at question number 2. We're going to make that same comparison with the other 4 gases listed on the right-hand panel of the simulator. We'll start with carbon dioxide. I'll give you a moment to watch the simulator run and see what happens to carbon dioxide, but in the interests of moving along and not leaving a lot of dead air, I'm going to progressively move at modest speed through all 4 of these different molecules. So that's carbon dioxide. Let's now switch to water. These first 3 molecules, methane, carbon dioxide, and water, are greenhouse gases. We'll see why we call them greenhouse gases and what effect they have as we continue to work through the remaining questions on today's lab. But for now, I'm going to switch from water to our first non-greenhouse gas. Nitrogen gas is the dominant component of Earth's atmosphere. It's made up of 2 atoms of nitrogen combined by a triple bond between their electrons. And then we'll finish by looking at oxygen, which of course we need to breathe. As you look at these last 4 of those 5 gases, you should have noticed similar behavior as those visible light photons stream past them. So please go ahead and record your answer and your observations to what you just saw as your response to question number 2. So how do photons of visible light interact with each of those 4 molecules that we just looked at? And while you do that, I'm going to get set up for our next question. All right, hopefully you've recorded your answer to question number 2. If you didn't, please feel free to pause the video and go ahead and finish that, but I'm going to move on. Question number 3 is asking us to look at what happens when we shine infrared, or heat, photons at these molecules instead of visible photons. We'll start once again with our friend methane. So I'll crank up our infrared light source, but I'm not going to have it spitting out photons quite so fast because I don't want them going across the screen so rapidly you can't see what's going on. And you'll notice that the behavior in this case is very different from what you observed when we were answering questions number 1 and 2. Watch what happens to methane when it happens to get hit by one of these infrared photons, and then observe what happens when that methane molecule ceases that jiggling behavior. We're going to compare methane along with carbon dioxide and water, our 3 greenhouse gases, with the last 2 gases, nitrogen and oxygen, which don't belong to the greenhouse category. So that was carbon dioxide, and I'll do now our last greenhouse gas, water. And across these 3 greenhouse gases, you should see broadly similar behavior. You ought to observe a pattern that's happening. Now, as we switch to the non-greenhouse gases, look and see how that pattern contrasts with nitrogen gas. I'll just wait for a moment so you can observe what happens. I'll even crank up the speed of the photons a little bit so you can be sure that it's not just coincidence that you're not seeing anything now, before we switch to oxygen. These last 2 gases, nitrogen and oxygen gas, are not greenhouse gases the way the first 3 gases were. And you should have noticed a distinct difference between the behaviors of the 2 categories. And that difference is what you should record as your answer to question number 3. Thank you for watching this video covering part 1 of the Greenhouse Effect Lab. If you need it, part 2 and part 3 are also available in subsequent videos. Thank you for watching.